Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. In today's reading, we continue to read about the great life of Abraham, the man of tremendous faith. Now, if you recall, yesterday we saw a little bit of a kink in the armor as Abraham once again was deceptive to Abimelech about the nature of his relationship with his wife. We questioned whether Abraham really was struggling with his faith at that time or not. But if there was any question about the level of Abraham's faith, that question is certainly put to rest in today's reading. This is arguably one of the greatest texts of Scripture in all of the Bible, because not only of its demonstration of Abraham's great faith, but of its laying the groundwork for the most central event of all history. You see, one day God comes to Abraham and asks him to sacrifice his son Isaac as a burnt offering on an altar to him. He asks Abraham to go on a 3-day journey to the mountains of Moriah, where there he will offer the sacrifice at a place that God designates. Abraham, seemingly without a question, calls his son, gathers the wood, gets the fire for the offering, even takes a couple of servants along, and they begin their journey. At a certain point, Abraham dismisses the servants, and he says something remarkable to them. He says to them, "You wait here while the boy and I go a little farther. We will worship God, and then we will return." Already, Abraham knows that he's going to sacrifice Isaac, but he believes that he's going to return with the boy. More on that later. Abraham willingly continues his trek up the mountain. At one point, his son Isaac says to him, "Father, I see that we have the wood for the fire. I see that we have the fire itself for the offering, but where is the lamb?" And can't you almost feel the lump forming in this father's throat? This father who had waited so long to be a father? This father who looks into the boy's eyes and realizes this is the fulfillment of a promise that he waited 25 years for its fulfillment? All of these thoughts must be going around in Abraham's mind. And then when his boy asks the question, "Where is the lamb?" Abraham, with a lump in his throat, replies, "God will provide the lamb for the sacrifice, my son." That's all he said. You have to wonder if Abraham had any questions in his mind. There had to be a part of his mind, wasn't there, that was asking the question, "Now wait a minute, God. If I kill this boy, that kills the promise. You said you were going to bless all the nations of the world through my offspring, and specifically through this boy, Isaac. What happens to the promise if I'm obedient to your will on this particular occasion?" And yet the text doesn't indicate to us that Abraham ever asks any questions or even has any questions. He meticulously goes about his duty. He binds up his son. He draws the knife. He's ready to take his son's life. The Hebrews writer gives us a little glimpse into this much later in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19, where we're reminded that Abraham was thinking, maybe, just maybe, God is going to resurrect this boy from the dead, that God has the power to bring him back to life. What kind of faith is that? So Abraham, with every intention, pulls the knife back to slay his son and to offer him as an offering, when an angel of God stops him, calling out to Abraham by name and saying to him, "Don't kill your son. There is a ram that's provided over in the thicket for you." And so Abraham sees the ram, offers it as a substitutionary sacrifice on behalf of his son, still in keeping with his obedience. And God is pleased. God even says on the occasion, Now I know the level of your faith, because you haven't withheld from me your son, your only son." What a tremendous story. But here's what makes it even more fabulous to me personally. You know that I'm a believer that the Bible is one story with one primary character, that character being God. This is such an obvious precursor to a time when God himself is going to offer his only begotten Son, his love of his life, on an altar called a cross, where he's going to allow his Son to die as a sacrifice so that his blood can be shed and the world can have the opportunity to be saved. And maybe the most fascinating part of that story is that historians tell us that the mountains of Moriah referred to here in the Old Testament in Genesis 22 later become known as the mountains around Jerusalem, the hills of Zion. And on one of these lone hills, probably at the very place where Abraham built his altar, was a hill called Golgotha, a place where God sacrifices his only begotten Son. Isn't it an amazing story? And aren't we glad that Abraham remained true to his faith? Aren't we glad that God blesses Abraham over and over and over again, and ultimately blesses his seed with the product of the greatest gift ever, Jesus the Christ? Now we have opportunity for life forever because of the sacrifice of Jesus the Christ, God's only begotten Son. Abraham's faith continues, and we read even today of Sarah's death. Abraham even wants to make sure that Sarah is buried in the land of Canaan because he believes God will ultimately fulfill his land promise as well. The promised land, the land of Canaan, is where Abraham and his wife Sarah will be buried. It's a wonderful story. Isn't it exciting to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.